Hello, Smart NGSS and Science Bits users. I'm very pleased to bring you an overview of some new upgrades that will be sure to make the learning and teaching experience even more exciting for you this year. Let's begin by clicking on My Classes. And of course, the start of the new year, if you want to set up a new class, you would do so by selecting the New Class button and changing the picture, adding a class name, assigning your new class to a group, and then editing the unit list by selecting the exact units you want your students to experience during the school year. Most of our users are pretty adept at doing this, so I won't spend a lot of time. If you need more help creating units, just send me an email and I'd be happy to walk you through the process. But let's look at some of the new upgrades for this year. I'm clicking on period 6 and you can see most of the information looks rather familiar. I have first quarter, but notice I do have a new section break here that's gray. That's a little different from last year. Also, we have the eye open and close that would denote accessibility for students. We have the icon to secure grades for different sections and of course for our units, but you'll notice off to the left of the grade book is a calendar that we now name Schedule Activities. So what does that look like? Let's go into a new unit and take a peek at the features involved in the Schedule Activities. Now, I know that I'm in Scheduled Activities because up top it says Unit Gradebook, and that would be the other environment that I can toggle to. So I'm not in Unit Gradebook, but I'm in Scheduled Activities. Let's begin by looking at the legend. Many of these icons are familiar to you, so let's focus on the new. First of all, we have a calendar with an orange question mark. We have a black calendar and an orange calendar. These different icons indicate whether or not you have scheduled activities within this particular unit, and I'll explain a bit more in a minute. The calendar with the green checkbox means that the activity has been scheduled and the window has closed and the activity is finished. Keep in mind, if students do not access a particular section of a 5E unit during that opportunity when the activity has been scheduled, they will then be marked absent. And in many cases that will result in a 0, which will affect their grade average. Now, there are ways that you can unschedule the activity and give students access that they may have missed, and I'll talk about that in a minute as well. Okay, so what does this mean for you as a teacher? We have heard from our user community that people wanted more control over how students progress through a unit. And before these recent upgrades, the control really settled in Explain and in Evaluate because you can always schedule assessments. Well, with the new Schedule Activities button, you may now control how the students progress through a unit. Let me give you an example. The first thing that you'll want to do is decide if the activity, particular section in the 5E unit, will be scheduled for the entire group or particular students. To schedule for your entire class, you click the header checkbox. To schedule for individual students or groups of students, you obviously select their names. Okay, so I'm going to schedule Engage for my entire students population in the, my entire class in this particular unit, the Sun, Earth, Moon system. I've selected all the students and I select the 5E column. Notice that a button appears below Schedule Activities. When I click on that, I now have an opportunity to schedule when these activities will be available to my class. If I change my mind or after I schedule the activity, I need to reopen or reschedule, I can absolutely follow the same process. Click on my student roster and click on Engage. This will open and then I can cancel the activity window. So let's just try this once again to be sure you understand how it works. Select your student roster or particular students and then the 5E section you wish to schedule. Once you do that, I'm going to toggle out of this for a minute. Once you do that, the Schedule Activities button will appear below and you have the opportunity to then schedule the window where each section will be available to your students. Now notice, since I've scheduled Engage, that calendar icon has now changed. The question mark has been removed and now we just have the black calendar. Once the window opens, the calendar will turn orange. When the window has termed, we'll have the black calendar again with the green checkbox. So what does this mean for students? Students cannot access any part of Engage until that window opens. And once the window terms, they're locked out and grades automatically lock. Now again, you can absolutely go in and reschedule so that, again, for particular students or your entire class, and reschedule that window to allow more time. Another option that you're very familiar with is to click on Unit Gradebook, and again, I'm toggling out of Schedule Activities when I do that. And once I'm in Unit Gradebook, I can activate the lock and unlock. So these grades will be locked at a certain period. I can deactivate that lock. That way students can freely use the activities in Engage. I hope that makes sense. So basically what we're looking at with Schedule Activities is the opportunity to schedule every phase of a particular unit by clicking the checkbox up top and then the Schedule Activities button. So that is a change. Another change is the weight icon. Again, I'm in Schedule Activities. When I select weight activities of the group, here you will find where you create your percentages per 5E section. So that icon has changed from last year. So far, we know that we can schedule each and every phase of a unit using the Schedule Activities button. We also know we will change the weight per section in the same environment. What's happening in Explain? This looks a little different from last year. Well, this icon I'm sure you're familiar with, grade penalty for each attempt. This is where you can, I hate to use the word penalize, but challenge students not to refresh, not to have a click fest, because each time they would do that, they may lose a percentage. So not many teachers exercise that option, but some do. This particular icon, see all activities of the group. Here you will find the opportunity to micro schedule all of the activities within Explain. How do you know which activity is which? By mousing over the activity listed up top. You can always go into the unit for a more detailed understanding of what each activity involves. So here is where you open the window for students to complete certain activities. Again, you may select your entire roster or individual students. You can select the activity and then schedule activity. Notice I've scheduled or selected a number of activities so that I can do multiple activities at one time. It doesn't have to be one per calendar. Also, in this environment, you'll see that the weight is off to the right. Keep in mind that you can control the statistical difference and scoring per assignment by clicking on the weights. Now, here's where it's a little different from last year. If you completely deselect the weights from a particular assignment, the students will still have access to it, but their score will not count toward the grade average in Explain and ultimately affect their unit average. With last year's platform, you had the opportunity to use a checkbox and determine which scores count and which do not count. That feature no longer exists. So what you can do within schedule activities is determine whether or not an assignment counts and to what level by selecting all the weights in a particular category or column. That assignment will hold more weight. When you deselect the weights, the students still engage with the activity, but their score will not affect their unit average by way of their Explain average. If I can recap that again. When we click on the Schedule Activities button, a number of features are available to us. First of all, I can schedule each and every 5E experience by selecting the checkbox, my roster, and then activating the calendar. I also can weight each of the 5E sections. And then finally, in Explain, I can granularly schedule each activity and also weight each activity. And these pieces, of course, affect the overall grade average for Explain. Now keep in mind, if you have students who miss the window of opportunity due to an absence, illness, all you need to do is select that student's name and the calendar will open for him, and you can reconfigure the window so that students will not be penalized for missing school or the experience. So that's a quick recap on scheduled activities. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the gradebook. There have been a few changes in the gradebook, but nothing earth-shattering. Let's go in and take a peek. So we have up top again, engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. We have the weight activities of the group. Again, you may configure the percentage per 5E in this environment as well as schedule activities. Off to the left, we have our student roster. Of course, the legend below will be your best friend. And then in each of the 5E categories, we have fewer icons actually than last year's platform. The lock and unlock button is self-explanatory. If you wanted to lock grades without going through the schedule activities calendar, this is the place you would do it, in Gradebook. And of course, to monitor progress, you can select the group icon, which will take you to your roster, and each of the activities in Explain will be available for you to preview. Now, there are two ways that you can look at this data, as you remember, either by clicking on the activity specifically, and you'll have an overview of how your students performed in the activity, or you may click on individual students and go through all of Engage per student. When you need to score free response answers, the easiest way to do that is through the roster by clicking on individual students. But of course, we know that grading the free response answers is not a priority, because in Engage and Explore we really want to foster dialogue. However, if you choose to grade those responses, the best place to do that again would be through accessing the roster. And it's really easy to toggle through the students because of the drop down up top. You can quickly move through each student, and of course the answer key is available to you as a refresher. So those are icons and paths that you're familiar with based on last year's platform. How is the gradebook different? Well, when we look at Explain, for example, we have one fewer icon here in this category, and when we look at the group icon, we'll see much of the same, but it does look a little different. First of all, you have the ability to lock and unlock individual activities. You also have the chance to examine the group response per assignment, or of course you can go through the roster and look at each student's response to a particular assignment. You also have the ability to weight the activities using the weight icon. You know, the question is, how many times have I said the word activity in this little vid? There really isn't another word to say other than assignment. But you have the ability to do that. So how is that going to work for you? Well, I'll tell you what. If you look at a particular activity where your students haven't done very well, you may want to decrease the weight or even eliminate it altogether, because that way your students, number one, had a chance to experience the work within Explain, but they won't be penalized if they need more information or they need a refresher or a more detailed explanation to be proficient. So this platform allows you to gauge their performance and to eliminate the heat, as it were, so that they don't skew their grade average in Explain when content is particularly challenging. So that's something to keep in mind. Of course, when we go into Elaborate, in some units we have the interactive rubric that's still available. And of course, when we're in Evaluate, if you want the students to have immediate access to all of their answers after they take their assessment, you'll want to open the eye or deactivate the eye so that all students can take the assessment, and then everyone can go back in page by page and review answers. Use it as a teachable moment. So that's really Very slight changes to the gradebook, fewer icons, but essentially the same information is available to you. So let's take a look at another way to slice the pie when it comes to explain activities. To do so, we're going to have to go up top to Edit Unit List. When your list of units opens, you'll notice there's a new icon available, a blue Edit icon. And that particular button will take you to another feature that will allow you to modify explain activities. So what essentially you will see is a list of all the activities listed in explain for this unit. This probably looks very familiar to the list that you saw in last year's platform after you selected advanced features. However, we don't have the toggle switch any longer, or the counting boxes, or the calendar. Obviously, those things have been reconfigured. What you do need to keep in mind is that you have the chance to deselect activities from this particular path. The difference is this: when you remove all of the weights from an activity in the gradebook through explain, the activity is available, the students can practice, but the score doesn't affect their grade. When you deselect activities through Edit Unit List and you select the I, deselect activities, these activities then do not appear to students. In other words, they don't have the chance to practice them. They will see them on the assignment list, but they'll be grayed out. They won't open and the kids can't use them. So that's the difference between weighting an activity and selecting the I or deselecting the I. And of course, once you make those choices, you need to have them stick by selecting the Save button. So these are features you're well aware of, but the new platform has set them up differently. Once you make those changes too within the edit icon, please be sure to hit save and return. Otherwise, the I deselected or open will not take, and the kids will have access to every and all activity. All right, just one other change has taken place, which is slight, and that is the way you can set up your sections. I'll go back into Edit Unit List. You'll notice two new buttons appear that will help you organize your unit list for students. When you select Add Cluster, click the Edit button, add your title, and then save. The divider is a gray box. Again, label the divider and then save. Now you can further organize how your students see the unit list, or what I like to call the learning path. After you have the list organized, be sure to select Save Unit List or Save and Return. Now the major difference between the divider and the cluster is the divider does not have a grade option. It's simply a soft break between units. Again, to help you better organize how the students walk through the learning path. Whereas the cluster has the grade icon. Through the grade icon, you can weight each of the units based on your desire or student performance. And then, of course, you can track grades and add those grades to your SIS. And as I've said many times in training sessions, you can actually reconfigure the weight for a section, for a unit, or for your entire entire learning path for the academic year based on student performance. So if you find that your students really bombed one particular unit, you can absolutely go in and change the percentages so that their unit grade, their quarter grade, their section grade will not suffer tremendously. And that's about it for the new updates with the 2019-2020 release. One last thing to note, as I'm scrolling down my unit list here, you'll see the schedule activities button is available on every unit except the units that I've created. These are my own external units. I cannot schedule those activities. I can, though, schedule the evaluation that I've created. So that is one piece of the platform to remember. You may not schedule your own unit activities, but you may schedule your evaluative units. Well, you know where to find me if you have any questions. I look forward to supporting the user community again this year. This is an incredibly interactive, challenging platform, and I know your students will really embrace the changes. Thank you so much, and I wish you the greatest success.